Good morning. Welcome to another edition of Take 5. It is Tuesday, May 10th, 2011. Appreciate the People Collab so much for letting me tag onto their videos, and I enjoy watching your guys' videos. And those of you who watch the People Collab, I'm assuming primarily are tweeners and teeners, so that's who I primarily want to teach to here. I've got one myself, got a couple other kids too, but anyway, we're in Matthew chapter 19 and verse 4, but just a little background. Jesus has been teaching and healing lots of people, and some Pharisees, they were kind of the bad guys in the story. They were the religious leaders, but they were trying to test Jesus and trick him up, and they said, is it okay to divorce your wife for any reason? And so that's where we are here. In verse 4, he answered them, have you not read that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female, and said, therefore, a man shall leave his father and his mother, and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. What therefore God has joined together, let not man separate. All right, we'll stop right there for a minute. Jesus is saying, well, in the beginning, it was never God's plan that there be any kind of divorce. He made man and woman, said, let them leave their father and mother. So the idea is they're leaving the family that they're in and creating a new family. One flesh. This is now one unit, a man and a woman. Not separate individuals that can go their own way. Once you make the decision to get married, you are now part of each other. That's what Jesus is saying. So they're not quite following it, and they say, in verse 7, they said to him, why then did Moses command one to give a certificate of divorce and to send her away? Now Moses, he was the guy, and you can Google it. If you know who he is, great. And any of you that come from a Jewish background certainly would know who Moses is. But if you Google Moses, you're going to see things like the Ten Commandments. And there was a big time old fogey movie back in the 50s, the Ten Commandments, and they had the Red Sea parting, and it's still pretty cool, even with the special effects they had back then to see it. But Moses, he represented the Ten Commandments primarily, and he represented the law. And besides the Ten Commandments, there were other commandments. But he did not ever command that a man give his wife a certificate of divorce. He permitted it. See, these Pharisees, these bad guys, they're trying to trip Jesus up. They're putting words in his mouth. See, Moses never commanded that, and that's the Old Testament, and we're in the New Testament now, and that's a whole another study. But anyway, it was never God's plan for man to divorce his wife, and Jesus is going to answer that. He's going to say, he said to them, because of your hardness of heart, Moses allowed you to divorce your wives, but from the beginning it was not so. What Jesus says is, Moses allowed it because your hearts were so hard. And sometimes people's hearts get really hard, and they're just going to do whatever they're going to do anyway. So back then, because the people of Israel, their hearts were so hard, Moses allowed a man to leave his wife if he would give her a certificate of divorce. Because if he gave her a certificate of divorce, that allowed her to remarry. See, women didn't have any rights to marry more than one spouse at a time. Husbands could back in those days. So a guy, he could leave his wife and go marry somebody else without ever officially divorcing his current wife. But what Moses allowed was the women could then remarry. That was the purpose. It was never God's plan. This was just something they did just sort of to look out for the women. You understand? So God cared about women being mistreated even back in that day. And we're almost done here for today. Verse 9, and I say to you, whoever divorces his wife except for sexual immorality and marries another commits adultery. And what Jesus is simply saying is, you're not allowed to divorce your wife, and a wife can't divorce her husband unless the other person has cheated on him. All right? If they've cheated on you, then he does allow it. But other than that, Man and wife are supposed to stay together, even if they're fighting, even if they have their issues. They're supposed to try to work them out. All right, and we'll be talking about this more in the next day or so. And I understand many of you have seen your parents go through divorce, or you know friends who have. It's very hard, very hard. But Jesus cares about that, and that's why He teaches so extensively on it. Please come back tomorrow, and we're going to talk more on the next edition of Take 5.